Welcome to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane. We're hosting this week again with Walter Hudson, a city councilman from Albertville. I'm Jeremy Munson, a state representative from District 23B in southern Minnesota. Today we'll be covering a lot of what's going on in politics in Minnesota. We'll talk about the new Minnesota Republican Party chairman, David Hann. We'll talk about the President Biden's letter to Attorney General Garland to engage the FBI and U.S. Justice Department to protect school boards against moms and students who testify against mask mandates, vaccine mandates, CRT, and required teaching of perverted sex ed to 6-year-olds. We'll talk about Frances Hagen, who blew the whistle and landed Facebook in an 8-hour timeout on Monday, costing Mark Zuckerberg $5.9 billion in a single day in the stock value of his company. We'll also discuss the federal district court judge Robert Pitman, his order blocking SB 8, which is the Texas abortion bill that protects killing children after their heartbeat starts beating. And how the Supreme Court already ruled in September that law could be enforced while legal challenges are pending. And then we'll wrap it up with the University of Minnesota reversing its decision to force naturally immune students to get the jab. All this and more on the Omnibus Podcast, where all subjects are germane.
Everything comes to the floor in such a hyper-partisan manner.
I would argue that it's already in the Constitution. We've overtaxed people. People like to legislate by emotion.
It's important to address when the governor oversteps his boundaries.
I'll pull up my pocket version here. 1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it. Well, Walter, we have some good news this week that the Minnesota Republican Party has extinguished the dumpster fire and elected a new party chairman, David Hann. So congratulations, David Hann, former senator, former minority leader of the Senate. We look forward to changing direction of the party, and it's great that the state central delegates elected a party insider for the most part. They decided to change course and not go with the businessman outsider model that they thought they would try with Carnahan, and decided to go with someone that was more stable. And I think that was a great decision. So congratulations, David, and look forward to sitting down and getting to know him more. I was not in the legislature at the same time he was, but have you heard good things and people are excited about David Hann at the helm?
Well, I don't know if people are excited. I think in point of fact, people are looking for the opposite of excitement. Like this, we've had plenty of excitement in abundance, way too much excitement. We need stability and sanity and calm, and somebody who is going to administrate and remain in the background and be more or less invisible. Someone who's going to make the operation of the party about the party and not about themselves. And that certainly fits the bill for David Hann. He's a guy who I've always respected. I've known him as long as I've been involved in Minnesota politics. In fact, he was my senator when I first started getting involved back in 2010. I moved around quite a bit in those years and lived in a lot of districts. I was represented by a lot of people, including your friend Pat Garofalo, and lived in Plymouth for a while. I lived in a lot of places for quite a few years, and in fact, I remember very vividly going to a town hall meeting that was hosted by David Hann, who was then a senator of the district in which I lived, along with both the Republican and Democrat representatives who were who were representing the halves of the district, which was very unique and something that I have not seen anywhere else to this day. A bipartisan collaboration between both houses of the bicameral legislature in having a town hall for constituents in their shared district. Just reflecting upon that, it tells you who David Hann is and the type of person he is, because he led the way on that and was just interested in engaging people in good faith with open dialogue in a manner that was sober and non-sensational. And I don't think we live in an era where that type of politics is possible anymore. But I certainly think we should aspire to it. And I think David Hann will bring that type of sensibility to his administration of the Republican Party in Minnesota.
Now, did you say that he had a town hall with Democrats?
He had a town hall for his district, and he invited both of the representatives who represented each half of his district, because as you know, the Senate districts are split into halves that are represented by representatives, and one of them was a Democrat elected by the people in that district. Yeah.
Wow. And actually, I've thought about reaching out to the Democrat rep in Mankato to see if he'd be interested in having a town hall. People are sick and tired of going to a town hall where they hear from one person and just they criticize the other party. They give all the partisan talking points, and they leave thinking, well, gosh, how can this be? And then they hear the other sides, later, and they right. don't hear a good, debate about the issues. So it's interesting that he did that. I think it's going to be. You're right. I don't look forward to the excitement. For some reason, Jennifer's just not going away. She's been writing. There was a letter to the editor that was published in the Star Tribune this week. But instead of playing the victim, it was really talking about how it was her decision to leave, and she's at peace with her decision. It was a tough one to leave the party, and then the next day, Jennifer posted another letter to the editor that was published by one of her fans talking about how she was the victim again. And she got a shout out in Politico today as a potential gubernatorial candidate in Minnesota. So more to come, I guess. But I hope we can turn the page. I think you said something before on a podcast about how we want to turn the page, but it's just sticky.
Yes.
And that's so true. We need to turn this page to move on because the election's coming faster than we think.
Yeah, I think at this point it's just a bunch of noise. Anything she has to say at this point, the party has moved on, and if she wants to try to maintain some kind of relevance, she's going to have to craft it through her own merit. Appealing back to this episode is not what I would advise if I was trying to help her. So,
and as elected representatives, I get we all get people that comment on our Facebook pages, Munson for governor. I get Facebook messages all the time, Messenger thing, you should run for governor. Have you thought about running for governor? And people ask me that all the time. And, I don't reply to the ones that are public. I just kind of skip over the comments. It just kind of makes me feel awkward, but I do see it as a compliment that someone appreciates the work I'm doing and they'd like to see it, statewide. But it doesn't, it could be dangerous to feed your ego by having hundreds and hundreds of people commenting on this, as has happened to many of us. But for people who are narcissists, it's like heroin for them, and it can be dangerous. So I think that you get surrounded by just a handful of people that keep on saying that kind of stuff, and sooner or later they throw their hat in the ring. One thing I wanted to mention that was kind of a story that so we had Phil Parrish run for party chair. He's running for Secretary of State, and then he stepped into the Minnesota GOP party chair race as a late entrant. I think there were 6 people running. Lalani was also running. She made it through the first ballot and dropped out. I think Phil Parrish made it 2 or 3 ballots and then dropped out. And then it came down to pretty much a split between Hann and Dettinger, and then Hann ended up winning. But Phil Parrish had a bad experience. I wasn't at the convention, but he became pretty frustrated and announced that he was leaving the Minnesota GOP. So said he's still going to run as Secretary of State. He's still going to run as a Republican because he very much is a Republican, but he's no longer seeking the Republican endorsement. I think he's lost his faith in the party, the apparatus.
I had heard that he was not running, and maybe I'm misinformed, but I could have sworn I saw a tweet today by some journalist to the effect of the MNGOP currently has no candidate for Secretary of State as a result of Parrish and his machinations. Maybe that's a reference to the fact that he's not seeking the endorsement. I don't know.
It was a very confusing letter. He said he's leaving the party, but what he meant was that he's leaving. He's not running for the endorsement. I think he's, when I was attending Minnesota GOP executive committee meetings every month, and I saw under Carnahan this anti-grassroots, directive. We had a great guy running for U.S. Senate for the endorsement against Jason Lewis. Now, Jason Lewis had millions of dollars in backing, and Rob Barrett had the grassroots. He was an honest Republican that was running. He thought he should, run and felt the need to do this, and that is everyone's right to run for the endorsement. But he was showing up at events where Minnesota GOP staffers were carrying Jason Lewis signs. And he said, you guys have to be neutral to this. And he came to the party, executive meeting and said, you have to tell your Minnesota GOP staffers that they can't walk around endorsing Jason Lewis and have the sign holding up the signs for him at the convention. And her response was really like, unless you have $3 million you've raised, you're not going to win. And DC supports Lewis. So that's just the way it's going to be. And I think that she said something about the Bob Carneys of the world or Phil Parrishes or something. It was pretty, negative towards these candidates who are passionate grassroots candidates. And I don't care if you're an outsider or the underdog. You have an opportunity to run. And if I'm a delegate, I put my name on that list as a delegate because I want to hear from everybody running, and I will make my own decision on who I support. It's not the party's decision to push one candidate or another. But I think that Phil Parrish has run a few times for different offices and is frustrated that the establishment has kind of shunned him. And so perhaps he's just going to run and have his say. And you know what? Being in the race but not running for the endorsement, although I support the endorsed candidate, he will likely be invited to the debates and have an ability to steer the conversation to be more conservative. We have a new entrant to running for Secretary of State on the Republican side. Her name is Kelly Janner Byrne, and I don't know her personally, but she ran for House before, and she's a former Mrs. Minnesota from 2001, and she's a hockey mom. That's all I learned about her on her website today. But so she's running. She's good friends with Kelly Fenton, very establishment Republican. So that will probably be somebody running, hopefully still running on election integrity, but running from the more moderate side. But I look forward to getting to know her as a candidate. So she's the only one currently seeking the endorsement on the Republican side.
Well, I don't know why Phil Parrish felt like he needed to leave the party. His public statements that I've been privy to have been vague and have contained no attempt at any sort of argument whatsoever. He just says the party's bad generically. If his reasoning is, as you put it, that the party has been unfair in its support of incumbents over challengers, I wish he would have been specific about that, because that is a problem. And indeed, Jennifer Carnahan and her administration were wrong, and the staff were wrong to be supporting Jason Lewis in the face of an endorsement challenge. And look, I love Jason Lewis. I mean, Jason Lewis is one of my personal heroes. So, this is nothing about him or nothing against him. Regardless of the personalities involved, the party exists in order to have a process of deliberation. And in order for that process to be fair, you can't have staff members and party officials taking positions in contested endorsements.
Yeah. And it's all of the candidates that give such great speeches and help, like I said before, change what the hot topics are. If they're out on the campaign trail and Jason Lewis has $2 million in the bank, and his endorsement opponent, who's an underdog, gives a barn burner speech that riles up the base, then likely Jason Lewis is going to be talking about those same talking points at the next campaign stop, because that's right. What's energizing the base. And so
Right.
having underdog candidates in the race, although they may not win, they can help steer the race and
Stirs the pot.
steers the pot and usually steers it to the right to be more conservative, and that's good. So I want to segue into a really important topic. President Biden sent a letter to the Attorney General Merrick Garland, asking him to bring the Justice Department, the U.S. Justice Department, and possibly look into the Patriot Act and what authority that they would have to possibly declare these moms that are mad at the school board meetings, to declare them some domestic terrorist, or can we use the Patriot Act to prevent these moms and these students from speaking out and getting angry about the mask mandates, the vaccine mandates, critical race theory, or the required teaching of these perverted sex ed stuff to the kids, like we have in Minnesota and many states, that this policy being pushed by Planned Parenthood. And that's really concerning, because I believe the First Amendment, at the core of the First Amendment, is people's right to petition their government for redress of grievances. And that is exactly what people are going to the school boards to do. They're speaking out, speaking their mind against a policy that the government is pushing.
I was listening to a Morning Wire report on this recently, and they were going through and kind of combing the records and combing the offered examples, trying to find some sort of rationale to provide credence and justification for why you would even think there's a problem here. And they came up empty-handed. I mean, they could not find an example of a crime involving participation in a school board meeting or political speech surrounding a school board meeting that wasn't addressed successfully and promptly by local law enforcement. And usually the crimes at issue were things like trespass, because the board had decided to cancel a meeting, or had ordered people to leave after a certain point, or had asked people to quiet down and they refused to, or whatever the case may be. Nothing that even remotely rises to the level of domestic terrorism. And so I think what we're seeing here is an attack on dissent on a couple of different levels. The first is the implication of basically an attempt to impugn people's character by implying that if you're one of these parents who's coming out to school board meetings upset about critical race theory or perverted sex education or mask mandates, whatever the case may be, that you are inherently suspect, and there is something wrong with you, and you should be regarded as a potential criminal or potential terrorist. And on the flip side, I think it is actually an attempt at incitement. I think that because my initial reaction to hearing this news is righteous indignation. It's anger. This angers me. It is infuriating to have a attorney general and a president of the United States and a Department of Justice and a Federal Bureau of Investigation that are looking at parents and students and residents attending local school board meetings and paying more attention to them than they have paid to Black Lives Matter, to Antifa, to any of these actual domestic terrorist organizations that have engaged in real violence, that have burnt down police stations, that have destroyed American cities, that have sowed chaos in our streets. This is infuriating. And I think that part of the strategy by the administration and by the left is to incite that fury. And so I think conservatives need to proceed carefully and deliberatively, yet boldly and relentlessly. We need to double down and show up even more than we already have been. If you haven't been showing up before, start showing up now. Show up to your school board meetings to talk about this. Show up to your school board meetings to throw it in the face of Merrick Garland. Mention him by name. Mention President Joe Biden by name. Mention the DOJ and the FBI by name. Be cool, be calm, be collected, but be bold and be relentless in saying we will not be silenced by these naked attempts at intimidation and the chilling of free speech.
Well, what frustrates me the most is the government is doing this. It's selling this idea that it's calling the Department of Justice to get involved because they want to quiet people down. They want to cool people off. And if they would just look to see what the schools are doing and say, hey, you know what, schools, maybe you should back off the CRT and the mask mandates. I've had people so upset, like, well, these school board members are quitting because they're just under fire. Well, then get rid of the mask mandate. Then people wouldn't be so mad, right? I mean, if you go to Google and you type in Munson domestic terrorism, you'll come up with articles about me because I gave a speech on January 6th, not in DC, but at the Minnesota State Capitol, because people were coming to the Capitol to talk about election integrity and asked me to come and speak to my constituents. I went out and met with them and I spoke for 5 minutes. And the Mankato Free Press, which is to the left of the Star Tribune, but it's the main newspaper down here in southern Minnesota, they ran an article about how I'm being investigated for domestic terrorism. And you go back and listen to my speech. All I talked about was election integrity. I didn't say fraud or stolen. I said that we need to look at voter ID, talking about what we can do at the legislature to improve election integrity. But they printed that the Speaker of the House, it says, quote, we're investigating whether there were members of the Minnesota House of Representatives who advocated for, incited, or supported acts of domestic terrorism. That was a quote from Melissa Hortman. Now, I called the Free Press and said that the House doesn't have the authority to investigate members for domestic terrorism. Like, it's not even possible. There was no investigation. There was never an investigation opened. And even if it was referred to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, they never opened an investigation. And it was weeks later that they finally wrote a kind of a retraction saying that the BCA cleared any lawmakers. They listened to it. They never even opened an investigation because there was no there. But either way, when you Google my name and it comes up with domestic terrorism, it looks bad because the headline is wrong. Yeah. But this idea that you can just throw around domestic terrorism because of speech, and political speech is the most protected speech, right? The speech people are giving at school board meetings is protected speech, and if there's violence, if there's people getting punched and stuff, absolutely, that is already illegal. But
even that doesn't rise to the level of domestic terrorism. That's assault. That's a low-level crime. That's something that local law enforcement is more than capable of handling. You don't need the FBI to come in and investigate. This has nothing whatsoever to do with any actual tangible crime that's taking place. This is the effective criminalization of political dissent, and it's aimed entirely at conservatives, and that's a theme that's going to resonate and echo throughout the different topics that we have to discuss today.
Right. And the result is that they want to silence people. The result is they don't want a local business owner whose children are in the school that they're going to go and speak out at the school board meeting, that they don't want that business owner's name, or the business owner doesn't want her name to be in the paper next to the words domestic terrorism, because it destroys your it destroys your online presence having that. I don't even like having it in my Google search because it upsets me. But for a business owner, it can destroy their livelihood. And so they're trying to silence people. On the same topic, there was this week news that a woman and a mother in Shakopee spoke out, or actually just wrote a Facebook comment that wasn't even that hard hitting against I think the superintendent of schools in Shakopee. This woman is named Tara McNeely, but she works at Hometown Bank, small, independent bank that has a branch inside of the Shakopee High School. So the bank has an agreement with the school. They're probably leasing they have a business relationship with the school. And I think the superintendent or the head of the school board wrote a nasty letter to her boss at the bank, and the bank put her on administrative leave. And this has ignited a fire because you see this stuff, people fighting back. I've had a lot of conversations with people about free speech and how this is, against the free speech. But and I've said on the podcast many times before that, when you work for a company, I think every company I've worked for, there's an agreement that I'm not going to go on social media and disparage the company or their clients, right? It's part of it's in the employment, the employee handbook, that even if it's on your spare time, you can't disparage the vendors or clients or whatever. Right. And so, this is a sticky issue for me because I value private contracts and employment contracts, and there may be something in the employee manual that says you can't disparage the school. But she has children in the school, and now she's been banned from even going in the school, which is I think a big deal too. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But the media has posted stuff that looks very bad for the school. Of course, the people are rallying around this employee of the bank and her right to, criticize the school board. And she didn't even criticize him that heavily. But this will be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, as you noted earlier, and we've talked about it many times on this program, political speech, it trumps a lot. I mean, just regardless of how you personally think or feel about it, historically, judicially, the precedent has been political speech can trump the letter of the law. I mean, we've talked about it here, where here in Albertville, we had a Black Lives Matter parade that was unpermitted, blocking county roads and city roads. This was a while back now. It's been like a year and a half almost. And it caused a whole bunch of controversy in this community. And as a city council member here, I pursued every avenue available to me to try to get answers to why this was allowed and what kind of options we have to pursue prosecution of people who clearly violated the letter of the law. And as it turned out, there weren't many avenues open at all, specifically for this reason. For better or worse, political speech trumps all, it would seem. I even remember I asked my city attorney, I'm like, we have ordinances against noise and other ordinances against nuisance that might apply to a large gathering in a residential property. What if I decided I was going to throw a Trump rally in my backyard and I was going to bring in, industrial strength commercial concert speakers and, have all sorts of rigmarole and keep people up, until 10 o'clock at night? Would I be able to say, and I'm violating all these ordinances to do it, would I be able to say that because it's political speech that you can't prosecute me? And his answer was maybe.
And we had someone on the show that had that enormous Trump flag in Buffalo, right? Yep. And it violated city ordinances because it was so big, but it was also political speech. Right. So it's a tough issue. But I also respect the private businesses' ability or their desire to remain politically neutral. They didn't want to take a stand. And if this woman, now this is just a little dispute with the school district, but if she came out as a big Trump person and kind of branded that bank as a conservative bank, they could lose business because of it. And if they, I've worked for companies also that say I can't contribute money to political campaigns. A major brokerage downtown Minneapolis that I've worked for says you can't give more than $100 to a political campaign. You can give it to the PAC that bank, right, that brokerage firm has, and then the brokerage firm will decide which political candidates they give it to. But that would have went to Hillary Clinton. So so that they have restrictions, and you agree to that when you work there. And does it stifle political speech? Kind of does. But you give up that right in order to work for that company. That's a decision you make. So it's interesting, and you can't also be in an elected partisan office if you are also an employee of that company. So more to come, I guess, on private contracts. But I think it was interesting. On the same note of silencing free speech, this week Frances Hagen, who is a whistleblower at Facebook, blew the whistle and landed Facebook in an 6 or 8 hour timeout in Facebook jail. And it was amazing because the stock for Facebook started tanking, and Zuckerberg himself, who owns, I believe, 55% of the shares of that company, lost $5.9 billion in one day. The outage came 24 hours after the 60 Minutes aired an expose on Frances Hagen and her inside information about how Facebook looked at the algorithms they were using and saw that it was detrimental to society and decided, if they want to continue showing people stuff they want to see. And so I have an interesting perspective on Facebook because I'm politically in Minnesota. I've got the largest, well, except for Scott Jensen, I have the largest reach of any politician in Minnesota. And I don't have necessarily the most likes, but when I had all these questions about Facebook and how the algorithm works, and I was reaching out to Facebook, they called us and said that they would fly out and meet with me in person. And so a Facebook executive from Washington, D.C. flew to St. Paul and met with me and my wife and the 3 other members of our caucus and spent 4 hours going through how the Facebook algorithm works. And because a lot of people thought about it's about the time that you post things. Is it really, be 7 a.m. or noon and 8 o'clock at night when you see the peak times of people, reading your post? And she said, no, it doesn't. It's like 3% of the algorithm. But the most important thing of the algorithm is engagement, because every time you grab your phone and you swing it down to like refresh your feed, the algorithm kicks in and it looks at, because there's 1,000 pieces of information that you would see from people in your friends list, but Facebook wants you to see stuff that you want to like, and so it will look at all of the stuff in your friends' feed that their friends have posted, but only show you stuff that you want to see, stuff that you've engaged with that's similar, and they also show you unique content. Everything has to be unique. They don't want to show you the same Star Tribune article that 20 of your friends have shared. They're going to, share it only once. And so a lot of people have said, well, I'm friends with so-and-so and I haven't seen their stuff in years. It's because you won't like any of the stuff they share. And so they don't share that stuff. So the more that you like things, they'll show you similar stuff. And so if you're conservative and you like looking at, Trump stuff, they're going to show you more and more conservative stuff, and they draw you aside. And so that's why Facebook has polarized our country. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but my mom is a flaming liberal, and I would swap phones with my mom, and she would look through my Facebook feed and I would look through hers, and we're both just appalled at the stuff that's being shared, because it's so offensive, just about everything in the feed. But Facebook doesn't want to show you that. And so instead of showing you a balance of right and left, Facebook continues to show you more and more of what you want to see. And that was designated as a problem, but it also gets people addicted to their service. And that's why their ads are, so valuable, because they show you more and more of what you want to see. Now, if they change the algorithm, or if government gets involved to try to regulate that, first of all, I don't even know how they do that, but it would cost. I mean, Facebook, people wouldn't want to watch it. They wouldn't want to scroll through that.
You're giving them way too much credit for acting in good faith. This is all highly well-produced political theater. You use the term conspiracy theory to kind of tease it earlier about, is there some sort of conspiracy in place here? Well, yes, but it's not a theory. It's a plain as the nose on your face fact. This gal is a confirmed dyed-in-the-wool, deep blue Democratic operative, liberal activist. She is being managed by a Democrat-controlled public relations firm, the same firm, as I understand it, that introduced us all to Jen Psaki, who's the current press secretary for the Biden administration. As she came out, she blew the whistle and then immediately was ushered onto 60 Minutes and then into the halls of Congress. Okay. This is a coordinated, pre-thought out, wholly intentional political show that has nothing whatsoever to do with blowing a whistle. She has provided us with no new information. She's provided us with no evidence of any sort of law breaking or corruption or anything that would typically go with the whistleblower label. Like there's not going to be indictments or criminal charges resulting from the things that this gal is saying. This is constructed entirely in order to create a very specific political narrative that goes hand in hand with the story we talked about before, involving the militarization of the Department of Justice against parents attending school boards. This is entirely about silencing specifically conservative speech. They're not going to try to adjust the algorithm to make it less divisive. What they want to do is they want to make it to where your mom's social media feed stays exactly the same as it is today. And your social media feed is missing all of the things that you currently enjoy because the Daily Wire has been canceled, the Blaze has been banned, all of these outlets that we turn to, the Omnibus podcast, all of these shows and outlets and pages and groups that engage conservatives are going to be censored, are going to be banned, are going to be highlighted and ostracized as being somehow uniquely divisive and uniquely harmful, because what they regard as harmful is disagreement with their agenda and disagreement with their ideology. And that they've made that extremely clear.
Well, my mom isn't, she's politically active, that she follows politics, but she's not like a delegate in that manner. But I would be curious to know if people on her side of the aisle, far left, have friends and colleagues that have been in Facebook jail, because I have a lot of people in my feed that are in Facebook jail. And I've had several people, because I think when you're on Facebook jail, you can still message people privately. And so I get messages from people saying, I can't post or like anything, I'm in Facebook jail, because they shared your post. I've had, in fact, in the last couple of weeks, I've had at least a dozen people that are in Facebook jail because they shared my post. Now, I have one strike against my Facebook page, because Facebook emails me when I get into the situation, but they're like, there was a post that you shared, a screenshot from the CDC of their definition of vaccines. And I made a post how the actual definition on the CDC website of vaccines changed overnight. Right. There was a screenshot of what it was before, saying that vaccines prevent disease. And then the next one was vaccines, lessen the symptoms or something like that. So, right. And so I was like, they changed the definition. That was the post. It was factual. And They gave me a strike against my page. 2 strikes, and they can silence me and put me in jail. 3 strikes, and they will delete my page. Along with it, 40,000 followers, and they've already throttled my reach. I used to reach about 500,000 people a week, and now they've throttled me down to 250,000 a week. It's amazing the power that they have. I had a conversation with another legislator today about a Facebook group that I manage that I'm an admin on, that has like 60,000 followers, and we're talking about the elections. Facebook knows how every single person in America is going to vote. 90% of people or whatever's on Facebook. And it's not because of the stuff they share. It's because of their engagement, which is how their algorithm works. It's based on what you like, comment, and share. And you don't even have to like it. You can just pause as you're scrolling by. And if you pause for an odd number, so many seconds, it shows your engagement with that post. Or if you click on a picture just to look at the whole picture, or a link, that's an engagement. And so that's what their whole algorithm is based on. And based on what you, Walter, like, share, comment, post, they already know how you're going to vote. And so they just need to tell the Democrats which people they need to get, door knock. And in fact, Zuckerberg, who donated $350 million to a nonprofit to get out and win for the Democrats, he could have given them in-kind donations of data saying, here's the 1,100 people in this precinct that are going to vote Democrat. Here's their addresses. And here are the 3 issues they care most about when you door knock on their door. this person's pro, unions are the biggest thing for this person. This person's anti-gun. This person, you know what I mean? He could give them all of that information. The Democrats could sweep every single election going forward because everyone in America that's on Facebook volunteers all of their likes and favorite, everything. They have all this data. I mean, I do list building too, and I understand. So I can tailor what people care about because I want to show people, what they most care about. Same with Facebook, right? Send emails to people that just on, opioids or medical cannabis or guns or whatever, because that's what they're most interested in following me for. I don't want to bother them with stuff they don't care about. But Facebook has super detailed information on every voter in America, and that's frightening.
Well, and yet that's not enough for them. On top of all of that advantage, on top of having the free association right to, or arguably with campaign finance law, share all of that data with their Democratic friends, that's not enough. They also need to silence you and me. And literally, like you and me, like a state representative in the middle of southern Minnesota and a city council member in a far-flung exurb of the Twin Cities. They're deeply concerned about what we're saying. And they are. They want to shut us down. This goes to show, along with the DOG story that we talked about with Merrick Garland, there is no limit to what the left is willing to do to subjugate their political opponents, to silence you, to disenfranchise you, to snuff you out. I mean, everything short of, the only reason we don't have gulags yet is because they don't need them. The new system, the new digital age is one where you could put somebody in a digital gulag.
Yeah.
That they don't even necessarily know that they're in. You just make them ineffective by throttling their capacity to connect with other people. I
just want to cut it. That is exactly right. I was thinking about that today. Like, it isn't the government can't silence people, but what if nobody heard them? And that's what the government. You can scream your head off and do all the posting you want on Facebook, but if nobody hears it, then what effect did you have? Right. And that's effectively what's happening, is that they're silencing, they're preventing people from hearing. They're not covering your mouth, they're covering everybody else's eyes and ears.
And the scary thing is they're already doing that now. And again, it's not enough for them. They want to go full throttle. They want to make it official. That's what this whistleblower BS is all about. They're trying to drum up not the actual political will, but the pretense of political will to regulate social media in such a way that they will be able to in broad sweeping fashion, silence people even more than they already are, and probably to start rubbing your nose in it, right? Like to stamp a scarlet letter digitally on your forehead, to let it be known, maybe contact your employers and whatnot, and let your community members know, treat you like a sex offender. We're going to send out alerts to your neighbors to let them know, so-and-so is a MAGA hat wearer, so-and-so is a Trump supporter. I mean, there is nothing that they will stop at to, again, subjugate their political opponents. This is evil. It's un-American. It's god-awful. And the fact that it doesn't provoke a widespread, tangible revolt in people is deeply concerning. I wonder to what extent this whole thing of Facebook having been down for however many hours, that's highly suspicious as well. Like, that's never happened. What do you, and you had said, and I interrupted you, that Zuckerberg lost all this money. No, he didn't. No, the only people who lost money in that is anybody who was stupid enough to sell. All that value is going to come racing back, and then some, and they know it. They were willing to endure this as a political stunt so that what's her face could turn around and go on Capitol Hill the next morning and make her point, which is exactly what she did. And that was all pre-scripted. It was all pre-planned.
I do have a feeling that that's what happened. And just based on how quickly she had the thing with 60 Minutes scheduled. She was in front of the Senate 2 days later testifying. And now they're talking about Section 230. And we've talked about this in the podcast a few months ago. But maybe we could do another episode of just talking about this. But just briefly, Section 230 was the last remaining piece of legislation of this enormous omnibus bill that was passed in Congress many years ago at the onset of the internet. And what it does is it provides protection to websites who have some kind of a filter, so on their information, who want to not censor but control the information. If you're a website on quilting, and you should have the ability to say we're only going to allow posts on quilting, and so if there's any filter put on a website, then there was presumably liability for if their filter didn't catch something, and there was child porn posted or something offensive or defamatory to someone. And so Section 230 said, look, the website sets up, they have their own rules on what they allow and don't allow, but it doesn't make them liable for information that's posted by a third party. And I think it's an important thing. I was with Trump for a while when he said we should get rid of it. But then after really researching it and talking to people that have deep knowledge of this, it's something that needs to continue to exist and should not be removed. But there's a debate on whether or not algorithms should be protected by Section 230. Well, algorithms really are what's filtered out to tailor information that people want to see. And so it'll be interesting to see where this discussion goes in Congress. And of course, Democrats having control of everything, how quickly they can sweep through, rules if they can get through stuff in the Senate.
Well, and again, similar to the debate we had regarding private vaccine mandates before Biden blew it up and made it all about state mandates with his declaration. I think we need to go back to the drawing board as conservatives and libertarians, and we need to really re-examine the practical reality in which we live, because so much of the law, and there are examples of this you can look at historically, whether you're talking about organized crime, prohibition. There are ways in which criminals and those with ill intent conjured methods to circumvent the spirit of the law by manipulating their constitutional rights in such a way as to protect them from accountability for acts that violated people's rights. Whether you're talking about bootlegging, prohibition, organized crime of any sort. And we recognized that, and we altered the law accordingly. We came up with things like RICO, which enabled prosecution of entire organizations as part of a criminal conspiracy when one of them could be proven to have engaged in a crime. And we came up with that because in response to the fact that people were utilizing modern machinations to violate people's rights and to violate the spirit of the law. I think a similar renaissance needs to take place in conservative and libertarian thought today, where we have to recognize that what Facebook is doing, what these big tech companies are doing, is they have devised, through the use of technology and the use of international corporate law, they have developed ways to control the population and to control political outcomes in ways that if governments did it, it would be clearly and obviously illegal. But they're able to get away with it because they're private. And so the question becomes, does it matter whether they're private? Do we just cede control and influence and power to these oligarchs? Or do we adjust the way we think about these organizations and their relationship with government in order to reform the system to restore the practical application of people's individual rights and things like privacy and individual autonomy. And I think we really need to have a come to Jesus moment as a movement and do some deep thinking about how all that works.
Well, my local paper, the Mankato Free Press, had a big editorial opinion on how government needs to regulate and rein in Facebook and hate speech and stuff on their platform. And, I was quick to criticize them about how you have a media company that's effectively asking for censorship of another media company. I mean, are they a platform? Are they a bulletin board system, or are they really? I mean, have we brought media to, instead of a newspaper, because who reads a newspaper anymore, to having independent journalists posting stuff on Facebook? And like I said before, they may not prevent you from posting stuff, but maybe they're preventing people from seeing it. So if you're printing a paper, virtually, the government or Facebook can control your distribution, and that is a form of censorship. But there's a fine line, a gray area between an online newspaper and people posting stuff on Facebook that is perhaps newsworthy. And we follow, and I'm not a big Twitter person, but I'm getting more into it and following independent journalists like Rebecca Brannon. When there's breaking news, I go to Twitter because that's live, and I find 4 or 5 people that I follow from different media places or independent journalists, and gather information on what's going on the ground during the riots or whatever. And it was important information. But if there is a government rule on censoring that is censoring freedom of the press. I mean, that's or First Amendment. I mean, that is, if government is regulating a private company, it is in effect infringing on people's First Amendment rights, and we need to be cautious on what we do. But I also want to say we don't want to have, because for a while, when conservatives were getting banned or shadow banned, that's when you had Parler pop up, right? And that's what I was all about. Hey, we'll just have different competition. Let Parler and MeWe and all these other companies start up. But I went and joined those things. But I don't want to be just stuck with a bunch of conservatives talking, because we're not going to win elections by convincing each other. We're not winning votes. We need to be in one area where we can talk to people in the middle and people on the left and have discussions that are civil to convince people.
Well, and on top of that, as we saw in the immediate aftermath of the election, they're not going to allow that competition to compete on an equal playing field. I mean, Amazon shut down Parler's servers. This idea of this is going to be solved through quote unquote free market competition. I mean, it's not possible. It doesn't exist. There is no free market competitor to Facebook, and there never will be. There is no free market competitor to Twitter, and there never will be, because they are embedded in the international globalist system, and they have been accepted. They have gotten the sword on both shoulders, and they have been knighted as agents of the machine, and they're going to be protected internationally by other corporations and by political entities and rights violating regimes around the world. And so, really the only way what's ironic here is that while we're debating on the right whether or not government ought to regulate these big tech companies, those big tech companies themselves, such as Facebook, are begging government to regulate them. They're saying, regulate us, please, because they want to be able, and this is a game that if you pay attention, you'll notice it goes back and forth between big business and big government, where when the heat gets turned up on one, they turn to the other to bail them out. Before Biden issued his mandate on employers, the pressure was being turned up on private business to initiate their own vaccine mandates and be like, okay, well, government or business wants this, so that becomes the pretense for government doing it. And this is the Facebook thing is the same thing in reverse, where, well, we want government to take the lead and say, we're going to regulate social media. But in point of fact, that's what social media wants, so that they can do what they already want to do, which is further throttle and subjugate the free speech and public square discourse of conservatives. And so it's this rat's maze, back and forth collaboration of evil that is taking place between business and government, that all redounds to you having fewer rights, you having less of a say, you not being able to organize, you not being able to be heard. And it's at the point now where they can't even tolerate your grandma going down to a school board meeting and saying her piece without getting the DOJ involved. I mean, this is insane. And I think
Yeah.
that the ultimate answer to it is going to be the dethroning, and the casting down of power in all its forms, whether it's corporate or governmental.
Someone asked me yesterday, you think that we can win elections without Facebook? And I don't think we can. Like, people get their information through Facebook, at least in the Republican circles. I mean, I would say Twitter is like 85% Democrats, but Facebook is, for political purposes, a majority of Republicans. And we need this tool to contact people. And so we have to figure out a way to work with it. I think Twitter said they were not doing political ads last election, but Facebook continued to. And we need Facebook, but we need to figure out something that we can all play together in the same sandbox. And people need to stop crying about, seeing too much. I don't know what the answer is. We need to have a thorough debate on it, but we need Facebook, because we can't mail it in. And we need this tool. I got a little panicky when Facebook went down, and I put out a post that it's possible that I could log into Facebook someday and my whole Facebook page is gone. And so I made a post, hey, go out to jeremymunson.com/email and sign up. So I have your email address. Email is, a lot of people don't like emails, but I still send them out maybe once a month to let people know what I'm working on. And it's an important tool that, should I, lose my Facebook page, at least I have, 18 or 20,000 email addresses of, that are active, of people that I can contact that have kind of signed up to be part of the movement here. So we need to kind of diversify how we're, have a backup plan in case Facebook just decides to deplatform us a month before the election.
So let me pour a little cold water on that with a couple of examples. First of all, I have a tab up on my laptop right now with my email. I have 12,650 unread messages.
You use Gmail?
No, I use Yahoo Mail.
I have 14,095 unread emails in my Gmail.
Right. And so, and of course, those come in as they come in, right? Like there's no algorithm there highlighting what you're more likely to be interested in. And then the other example I was thinking of is, I believe it's the Center for the American Experiment just launched a new website that's basically like an old style forum, where you could sign up as a user, and they have, threads, and it's moderated. And the whole purpose of it is for people to get together and have discussions in a safe space about schools and organizing for school board meetings, and advocating for issues related to school districts. As we were having this conversation, as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking to myself, oh, I should go check on that board. I can't for the life of me remember the website or what it was called or how to even look it up. This is the problem with saying that we need to have alternatives to Facebook or alternatives to Twitter or alternatives to this, alternatives to that, is that it's like going back to the mid 20th century and the advent of the telephone and radio, and saying we need to have alternatives to Ma Bell and RCA. It's like there are no the alternative is going back to Pony Express. The alternative is going back to telegrams. And it's like, yes, you can use that stuff, but it is not you are not going to be operating on the same level as your competition that has access to the modern technology and the modern way of doing things that everybody has ingrained in their head and knows how to use. The reason why I've been fighting against it more and more as of late because of how much I hate what they're doing, but my immediate instinct every morning is to check Facebook. Why? Because I know that whatever's going on, it's going to be there.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise, what am I going to do? I'm going to look at the Star Tribune. I'm going to look at.
It's yesterday's news. I used to work on a stock trading for years, and I had a Bloomberg terminal, which had like live feeds from Reuters. I mean, breaking news. I had all this stuff because I'm trading stocks and things move quickly. And I had a subscription to the Wall Street Journal and stuff. Never read it. It was yesterday's news. I want to know what's going on now. But this Facebook algorithm, I mean, it's tough because I talked about how your level of engagement determines your reach. And if I don't post stuff every day, 2 or 3 times a day, and that those posts have to be engaging to people have to like or comment on them, then I lose my megaphone. It silences me. I can't take a week off of Facebook. And people criticize me because I spend too much time on there. But I'm reaching, 1/4 to 500,000 people a week in Minnesota. 90% of them. I've got, 8,000 people or 6,000 people in my district that engage with me. So it's like it's huge. But
I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was hilarious because there was a guy in one of your comment threads who was coming after you for this podcast, talking about how you're wasting time that ought to be spent in constituent outreach. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you talking about? I'm like, this is constituent outreach. Like, you're reaching more constituents, you're engaging with people more directly and more interactively through the time you spend producing this podcast and fiddling around on Facebook than you could through literally any other means. What are you going to do? Sit there? And I even interacted with the guy a little bit. I'm like, what's he supposed to do? Start checking all those unread emails? Like, that's going to be a more effective use of time? No, you're reaching, like you say, thousands of people every time you engage on specifically that platform.
Yeah. So, I mean, I appreciate Facebook and what they do, and I know they need to make a profit. But if they, when it gets down to the kids, I mean, I think that maybe there was an age that you're supposed to be, but you just kind of self-verify. And so there's kids that are younger. I've had my kids run Facebook off and on until they get caught with having an account and we get them off. But there's a lot of inappropriate stuff and we need to have proper filters for kids. But when they were talking about, body shaming and anorexia, and if they get interested in that stuff, then they feed them more of that. That can be an issue. But I think that this has exposed what they're doing, and if people are disgusted with it, let's have a conversation about what they're doing, see if it's appropriate, see if. But I want to continue using it, and I think it's an important tool. But we need to, better mix the pool out there of so people don't just aren't so polarized. I need to talk about a couple of court cases that are really important. A federal district judge named Robert Pitman, he issued an order blocking SB 8, which is the Texas bill, which prohibits the killing of children after their heartbeat starts or their heartbeat is detected. The Supreme Court had already ruled in September that the law could be enforced while other legal challenges are pending. But this district court judge has put an order blocking this from being enforced. It is a major setback for the pro-life movement, and it's a big win for the pro-abortion movement. And we're going to see how this plays out. I think it's sad that they block this from being enforced. And we'll see how it plays out.
I find it fascinating that the Supreme Court could rule that the law can be enforced, and then a lower court somehow can rule that it won't be. But whatever the legal rationale or justification for that is, I don't think this is nearly as big of a deal as some people would like to make it out to be. I mean, it matters, of course, but this was baked into the cake. I mean, there's gonna be the legal back and forth and the injunctions and counter injunctions and counter rulings as this works its way through the process. Ultimately, look, if Republicans were smart, which I'd love to live in that alternative universe, this would be one of, if not the top things that they were talking about all the time. I was driving in town here and was just blown away by the fact that I saw people lined up and down the main county road cutting through town here with signs, pro-life signs, pro-life protesters, just quietly with dignity sitting there and protesting on behalf of babies, unborn babies. People, there's no other issue that does that on the right. It is far and away, way out in front, the issue that activates people and fires them up and gets them up off their butts and out of their houses and off their couches. And the fact that Republicans are like ashamed of to talk about pro-life issues and to fight on this front is aside from the moral cowardice of not being willing to stand up in defense of the most innocent and defenseless people in existence, it's also politically retarded. Like, you are leaving all of this energy on the bench that could be mobilized to political effect. And the left certainly isn't holding anything back, obviously. And so, look, it'll be a great day if it ever happens where there's finally an alignment between the political strategy and moral courage of the Republican Party and those same qualities in the grassroots, because people are waiting with bated breath for true champions on the issue of life.
Well, as I got involved in politics, talking about guns, babies, busting the public unions, I've just always thought, you know what? So people are so polarized in these issues. I don't think it's ever going to, have any major swings one way or the other. It's just constantly, fighting. But there are a lot of things in the middle that we can get done. We could reform spending, do a lot of things. It wasn't a main focus, but with the Supreme Court, with the appointments that Trump made to the Supreme Court, there's a chance things could change. And I was on a panel yesterday with Center of the American Experiment, Hinderocker, and 3 deans of private schools, and Susie Ackland, and it was all about education. And talking to people from the Center of American Experiment, they said they've been working on school choice for 35 years, and they haven't made headway. But in the last year, between COVID, mask mandates, vaccine stuff, CRT, child sex ed, it is like a perfect storm where we could actually do something and stop the teachers' unions from, we could lessen their grip and actually usher through school choice. The time is right? And same with pro-life movement. There's an opportunity we haven't seen in decades. And unfortunately with guns, with Biden, controlling DC, there's some scary stuff that can come out against us. So the fight is on, and it is going to get worse over the next year before the election. The polarization, but we need to be smart about stuff on how we can actually pass legislation. I think there's ripe chance of getting through school choice in Minnesota, even in Minnesota.
Well, and I know, this is a secular program, and we usually keep it in the weeds of public policy and political analysis. But I will say that I do personally believe that there is a providential component to the way these things turn out. And when you're on the side of righteousness, you're going to tend to get a boost. And I think that for the longest time, and again, I count myself as having been complicit in this sin on the right, for the longest time, we sidelined all these social issues and we convinced ourselves that because they're polarizing and divisive and people get angry and shout and scream about it, that we shouldn't talk about it and we shouldn't make it a central plank in our platforms and campaigns. And all we accomplished with that is by ceding all of the moral territory to the left, because they never stopped. They
Yeah.
never stopped. And so, if to the extent that we're not willing to engage on issues of morality and righteousness, then we can't really expect to get the benefit providentially of having the wind at our backs politically. And I think that that's a component that should not be sold short.
Well, I want to end on a good note here, on this fight for stopping vaccine mandates, and for me specifically from government. There was a student at the University of Minnesota who had gone through COVID and built natural immunity, and is not wanting to get vaccinated because the University of Minnesota is requiring that students get the jab. And so the student filed a lawsuit against the University of Minnesota, and it looks like it wasn't going to the ruling wasn't going to come out in the university's favor. So the university today announced that they're going to reverse their policy on vaccine mandates, but they're going to allow people to file religious exemptions. So if you have a conscientious objection to vaccines, they have said if you file the paperwork by this Friday, just fill out the religious exemption and they will accept it, and you will not be forced to be vaccinated. That is a huge win. And it is also a sign that perhaps the government mandates on vaccines, specifically not recognizing natural immunity, which is a big issue, that it's starting to crack. And there's a possibility that more legal action can break down this mandate from the federal government, or at least from government entities here in Minnesota, with the state and public schools and universities and schools mandating it for teachers, any government entity. That is a huge win, and I'm looking forward to see how this plays out.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, of course. For whatever reason, I'm infuriated by the news. And I think the reason why is because, for me, it's personal. My wife was mandated through her job to get the vaccine against her judgment. And all I can think about is, if the organization she works for were to follow suit and say, okay, uncle, you can have a religious exemption now it's too late. Like, now she's already taken it. And how many people are in that same boat, in that same category of they didn't have, for whatever reason, the wherewithal or the inclination to fight back, and had to capitulate against their will to taking a medical treatment, and for them to just kind of frivolously be like, oh, sure, fine, we'll accept your exemption as long as you get it in by Friday. Like, it's just so infantilizing and such a, I mean, I'm not underplaying the significance. Like you say, it is a win, but it's also kind of like, let them eat cake. It's there's a certain attitude behind it where it's like, why do I even have to give you a religious exemption? Like, I should have to opt into your BS. I don't have to give you a reason why I'm not going to do it. And so it's just infuriating that we continue to live in this moment where individual autonomy and individual judgment and medical freedom just are not respected in any corner, and we have to fight so hard to get even the smallest of victories.
I was hoping to be more uplifting, Walter. I'll try one more uplifting story. Last night, after I was on the legislative panel on education against talking about CRT and other things, I attended a big rally at the Mayo Civic Center in Mankato, welcoming Charlie Kirk in Turning Point USA's tour of exposing critical racism. It was a great event. I would guess that there were 700-800 people in this auditorium, and 80% of them were college and high school kids. It was so, I mean, I'm 45. I brought up the average age of the room, which I don't usually do when I'm at Republican gatherings. But it was great. There was so much energy and excitement, and there was some haters there that he spoke for like 25 minutes and then took questions and then basically tore down everybody's argument. And it was great. It was also helpful for the conservatives in the room to listen to the liberal arguments and then watch Charlie Kirk systematically tear down those arguments, because it's something that we need to learn how to do. And it was a great event. Can't say enough about it. I mean, it was just great energy and great to see all the young people involved.
Yeah, I've long said that, and it's corny and everybody says it, but I think there's a rational justification to it. The youth are the future of the conservative movement. Whether or not they choose to continue calling it the conservative movement or not, because there is a natural inclination toward rebellion in youth. There is a natural hubris. I see it in my 8-year-old, right? Like this natural sense of, I know better than you. You're slow, old, and dumb, and don't know the right modern way of doing things. And of course, when that can be easily corrupted, and the left has obviously done a very good job of corrupting that sense of rebellion, but it can also be harnessed for good. It can also be put to tremendous effective, decent, moral, righteous use, because we happen to live in a time where the prevailing generation, the establishment that is in charge, needs to be rebelled against viciously, needs to be pushed back against and defeated. And the younger generation is going to have to be the one that does that. And they have plenty of rational reason to want to do it. They are being saddled with the bill for everything that we are doing that our parents and grandparents did. And we're handing them this filthy rally race baton and saying, here you go, have fun. And what they need to do with it is turn around and club us over the head with it. And one of these days, a generation is going to do that. One of these days, a generation is going to rise up and say, we're not paying your bills. Too bad. Oh, you're counting on Social Security? That's fun. Good luck with that. You ain't getting it, old man. That's going to be their attitude.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've long said that about my generation, that the baby boomers grew up where their parents were conservative and fiscally conservative, and the baby boomers was all about me, and they spent everything and ran us up into debt, and then just handed over the reins to our generation. And now we got people our age in politics that are continuing to spend, and we own it too. But this is we need some major corrective action. And instead of calling it the conservative movement, I just wish we would adopt the liberty movement, because liberty is something much easier to sell to kids and teach them what liberty is and what it means. And that's where we make major headways. Oh, and by the way, another good news I want to end on too is that the Minnesota college Republicans were welcomed back into the Republican Party, State Central, because Carnahan kicked them out, which is, why do you do?
No.
Why do you kick out the college Republicans from the Republican Party?
She did. Of course
she did that. Had some petty disagreement with them, and she kicked them out of the party. I mean,
jeez,
horrible. But
Wicked
now that
Witch of the East.
we welcomed them back. I mean, that's where you have to grow how can you grow your party if you're not connected to the college Republicans? So they're back in the party. We need to grow this movement, and the Charlie Kirk's group is doing a great job. Turning Point USA, they have chapters all over the state. Mankato's got dozens of students involved. St. Thomas kids came down. Winona kids from Turning Point came over. I mean, we need to build this movement on campuses to take back our country, and it starts with the youth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have high hopes for the young generation, because they're smart enough to recognize when they are being manipulated and when they are being condescended to and talked down to. They have a savvy when it comes to media and public communication that older generations do not have. To a large extent, our generation and those older than us are still susceptible to a lot of the advertising and political rhetorical tricks that worked for decades on end in years past. Those tricks don't work on the young people. They see right through it. They know when they're being manipulated. And so it's going to be interesting to see how things pan out when they get a hold of that relay race stick.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in for another episode of the Omnibus Podcast. And Walter, I really enjoyed doing this podcast with you. I think it's a great mix, and I've heard from a lot of people over the past few weeks. More people are tuning in and really talking about how a great in-depth conversation it is. And as we get closer to the legislative session, we'll be talking about more bills that are being introduced, more stuff I'm working on, and how we can advance good conservative bills, bring freedom and liberty to the state, be more like South Dakota and Iowa and other states around us that somehow live in freedom, and we are stuck here in East Berlin. But thank you again for co-hosting, and thanks everybody. You can go out to jeremymunson.com/podcast for 18 different locations to subscribe and download the podcast. Thank you everybody for tuning in.